Thank you. Okay, my clock shows 5 o'clock, so I'm going to call to order this special meeting of the Chico Unified School District Board of Trustees. If you would, please rise and join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Before we begin our items on the agenda, I wanted to explain a few things about how the meeting will be run. All of the agenda items under the discussion calendar are information only. This means that the board will not be taking any action on these items this evening. I'd like to quickly review our public participation procedure for tonight's meeting. Per the governor's executive order, our meetings are being conducted virtually to help reduce and minimize the risk of infection from COVID. I do not have my mask up because it fogs my glasses and I cannot read. But rest assured, we are at least 10 feet apart. Thank you. Since this is a special Board of Education workshop, public input must be regarding an item that is currently on the posted agenda. Members of the public who wish to bring forward an item that is not on the posted agenda must do so at a regular meeting of the board. Full participation information can be found on the meeting agenda. We continue to encourage members of the public to participate. During tonight's meeting, comments on an agenda item will be taken when the agenda item is being discussed by the board. There is an item on our agenda which requires a public hearing, and so the comments regarding that item will be taken when the public hearing has been opened up. Speaker priority will be given to those who have submitted a speaker's card, and it appears to me right now that there are 2 that have done so. If there is still time remaining within the designated 10-minute time allotment, then the board will provide an opportunity for members attending the Zoom meeting to raise their hand and speak, and each speaker will be allowed to speak for 3 minutes. Speaker priority will be given to speakers who have not yet addressed the board, and only a repetition of speakers will occur if time allows. We also caution you that if there is redundancy and the same comment being made over and over and over again, we will maybe ask to hear from other viewpoints. If time remains, we may ask that the time be extended for the public comment to continue. Speakers are asked to attend the board meeting virtually through the Zoom invitation link at the top of the agenda. When it is time for speakers to address the board, their name will be called and the microphone on their Zoom account will be activated. Speakers should rename their Zoom profile names to match the name on their speaker's card to expedite this process. After the comment has been given, the microphone for the speaker's Zoom profile will be muted. The board is unable to read written materials presented during the meeting. Members of the public may submit an email that will be sent to each board member by using the email address, and public comments that come via email will be attached to the meeting record. Okay, I hope that is clear enough, and if so, we are going to continue with the first item on our agenda, which is our consent calendar. So are there any board members who wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? Yes, Dr. Kaiser.
I wish to pull the contract for Comcast.
Okay. And that's under 1.1, correct? Okay, any others?
Do not.
Okay, any others? Linda, any from your side?
Nope.
Okay, all righty, so may I have a motion for the remaining items?
I move to approve the consent calendar for business services.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Dr. Kaiser, a second by Tom Lando. We will take a roll call vote for all those in favor of this remaining portion of the consent calendar. Linda, how do you vote?
Hovey, aye.
Lando, aye.
Griffin, aye.
Robinson, aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Kathy, what about the Comcast contract?
So I wanted to pull the Comcast contract to give a shout out to Comcast and to John Vincent, who arranged this contract. This gives 2 months of free internet service to qualifying families, an additional 4 months of free internet service that we at Chico Unified will pay for. So with all the duress that many families are facing, I thought this was a tremendous cooperation between Comcast and Chico Unified, and I just wanted to salute them. So with that, I move the Comcast Communications contract.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, motion by Dr. Kaiser, second by Eileen Robinson. Any further discussion regarding this item? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, that passes unanimously. I also understand that this period of time after that 6 months elapses, that we will be renewing for those families that are not able to afford the Comcast. Is that accurate, Mr. Bultema?
That is accurate.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Who was that really supposed to be to you, Mr.?
That's okay.
Okay, I wasn't sure who was the one who was up to speed on that.
Is
Okay.
John Vincent blushing?
Yep.
Oh, you're over there. Okay. Didn't see you over at that end. You would for sure know. Okay, so that takes care of our business services consent calendar. We will move now to our discussion portion, and this has to do with educational services, the information about learning continuity and attendance plan, and Tina Keene is going to start off with that. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you very much. Tonight I'm coming to talk to you about the components of the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan. Typically every year we come to the board and our community with our LCAP, which we do not have in place right now due to COVID. So John Vincent, if you can, oh actually I have it, I'm sorry, right here. We're going to start in with a little bit of the background of what this plan is. Senate Bill 98, which was adopted in June, I believe, added a number of provisions to the Education Code regarding instruction during the 2021 school year. One of these provisions is Ed Code 43509, which, among other things, requires all districts and charter schools to draft and adopt a learning continuity plan. This plan requires a detailed description of the ways the district will address many issues related to in-person and distance learning. A little background on this, it is a pretty comprehensive document of about 35 pages, and it is all narrative except for some budgetary pieces. So tonight I want to give an overview on the parts of the plan that there are 10 of them that we were asked to complete, and give you kind of an idea of the feedback that we're going to be getting in the next few weeks between our public hearing tonight and when I come back to you on September 16th for approval. As you can see, all of the districts and charters in the state have had to do this. The interesting thing with this is that there is not a whole lot of time, as we heard about this in July after it went into statute, and it has to be adopted by September 30th by the local board. In the midst of that, we get school up and going, and we had changes, as we know, in between that time as well as far as our model of instruction. So it is a pretty tight turnaround. I do want you to know this public hearing is to gather input. I've already started gathering input from site council meetings. There was one at Marigold today. We'll take it to our DLAC, which is our District English Learner Advisory Council, on September 9th, and virtually every other school will be having their site council between now and then to gather feedback from folks. So it is narrative. I apologize for a lot of the words. I will show you the document after I go through the slides so you have an idea of what it looks like, but bear with me if I read some of the slides. So the Learning Continuity Plan highlights a couple of things, how the district will provide continuity of instruction during the school year to ensure pupils have access to a full curriculum of substantially similar quality, regardless of the delivery method. One thing I do want to comment on this, Jeanette Spencer from Butte County Office of Education, who works with us on these plans, said a big part of that, providing continuity of instruction during the school year, is also to keep in mind going from perhaps distance learning to in-person learning. We hope it doesn't go back again to distance learning, but to keep in mind, as this is really a moving target for so many, we have to think in those terms. An important piece of this plan is to ensure access to devices and connectivity for our students. Professional development plays a big role as well, and resources, those things that will be provided to staff, including technological support. Learning loss, how the district will address pupil learning loss that resulted from COVID-19 during the 2019-20 and 2021 school years. A little note on this part right here, throughout the plan does run the theme of what was lost in education due to the March 13th date of having all of us go online. There was significant time there that we know was lost with learning, and that does present itself in this plan, even though it's for the year 2021. And of course, the end, which is one of the reasons we are here tonight. The plan must be approved by the local board by September 30th after a public hearing has been held. So digging in, there are 10 sections of this plan. It's important to note that within the 10 sections, there are subsections as well. So there are 4 to 5 subsections in each of the 10. Again, I'm not going to go through all of it because it's very wordy. We will have the draft on the website, so it will be totally transparent to the public and all, pardon me. Here we go, section 1, general information. This section wanted us to write a brief description of the impact of COVID-19 and how it has had an impact on Chico Unified and our community. Just a quick note to this, as we all know, our county and our community has gone through several things in the last 2 years that have impacted us, and this is right on the heels of that. Stakeholder engagement, this is a big piece of this plan. It includes, and wanted us to describe the efforts made to solicit stakeholder feedback. Those stakeholders are our students, parents and families, teachers and staff, and also our stakeholders who speak languages other than English. We have done this extensively and continue to do this in various ways. There are Zooms that we've had with students, both elementary and high school, parents and families, lots of surveys. There are Facebook Live, communication, ongoing communication with families and parents in that regard. Teachers and staff, there were a large group of teachers and staff every Monday through the summer that got together on Zoom to help kind of flesh out ideas about what we can be doing as news was coming to us about the possibilities of instructional models. And of course, our stakeholders who speak languages other than English, we ensured that surveys and information was always translated. And again, we'll take it to our District English Language Advisory Council next week. Section 3 talks about in-person instructional offerings. So this describes the actions the district will take to offer classroom-based instruction whenever possible, particularly for students who have experienced significant learning loss due to school closures in the 1920 school year or are at a greater risk of experiencing learning loss due to future school closures. There is also a funding part of this related to our in-person instructional offerings. In the plan, if you read it, it really describes our plan that was adopted by the board in July, the AM/PM. That would be the piece, the information that we know at the time of this plan writing, that we would go forward for in-person instruction in that model. And the funding is quite extensive. Chico Unified has received a large amount of money through the CARES Act, which is federal money, and that money is all funneled into the pieces, many of which are in this plan in terms of professional development, technology, curriculum, things like that we've been able to use that CARES Act money for. In the event of distance learning, which is also included in the plan, we were asked to describe how the district will provide continuity of instruction during the school year to ensure pupils have access to a full curriculum of substantially similar quality regardless of the method of delivery. We also had to address our access to devices and connectivity for our kids and families, pupil participation, and progress. It also will address the grading and assessment, which Ted and John will give a brief description and update to you in a moment. The distance learning professional development, staff roles and responsibilities, how we're supporting our pupils with unique needs, and again, more funding in terms of the distance learning piece. So at this time, I want Ted and John to describe the grading and assessment piece.
Good evening. Are we working? Okay, perfect. In the elementary world, that's always a big question as far as for elementary teachers in particular. Where do we start instruction? So trying to get a sense of what we do with that as far as how it relates to grading and some of those kinds of things. Our elementary DLC group met right away, second week. They were meeting and kind of going through our district assessments. So they really looked at it through a lens of what do teachers need to know about their students to start instruction at the appropriate place? And then the follow-up question is, what's doable right now in an online world as far as being able to assess students and get a sense of where to start with it? So we went through and did a pretty significant modification of our assessments as far as what they're doing, shared it out with staff, and everybody is off and running as far as baseline assessments in elementary right now, kind of following up with that. Our elementary DLC is meeting again tomorrow, and we're going to start talking about assessments as it relates to the curriculum then also, and kind of the scope and sequence, and what we're looking for teachers to try to be doing as far as assessing and sharing that information with parents from there. Eileen?
Thank you, Ted. Because I know there are guests listening in, could you explain the DLC and the other things that you're commenting on by?
Sure. So for Chico Unified, we have a district leadership council, hence DLC. It is composed of a teacher leader, and there's one from each school site. And they are composed of kind of different areas. We have primary teachers, we have Title I teachers, we have special ed teachers that are on that group. So they're charged with looking through kind of the things that are happening in the district and helping us work with putting things together related to what assessments are relevant to give, how our report cards look, what kind of professional development we want to put out for staff. So that's the big charge of DLC. So we meet a couple times, 2 to 4 times a month, depending on what's happening. And that's really our teacher leadership group, and we really lean on them pretty heavily to kind of look when we're making district-wide decisions that affect everybody. That's the group that we lean on and kind of look for guidance on with those kinds of things. So that group was incredibly helpful with this, because I know they are at a school site level. When teachers have questions or concerns, that's who they go to also, because they know that group meets consistently to talk about all those topics in the district. So that group's going to keep meeting weekly for the time being to kind of talk about assessments, professional development in particular, what do we need to be working on and focusing on in those areas. And that's where they're at right now. We're going to meet tomorrow, like I said, and talk about more curriculum-based assessments and how they match up to the scope and sequence with things as well.
So Ted has stolen most of my thunder about DLC and the plans that people are developing. Those groups are still meeting. They're meeting regularly. We met last week for the first time with ELA and this week with math. With Edgenuity and the other online platforms that we're using, grading and assessment is pretty consistent. It's pretty clear how the students are going to be graded and assessed. There's a significant amount of consistency, which is something we came out of the spring desiring. I think it's the main reason grading has been included in this board workshop that we revisit last spring through a grading and assessment lens and ensuring that there's equitable and consistent grading. And we know there's some challenges inherent in too much consistency to be sure that we are meeting the needs of various levels of students. And so that's where the teachers come in and doing all they can to adapt and adjust to students' needs while maintaining that consistency. So I'm sure we'll be talking later about other aspects related to curriculum and grading, but from a secondary perspective, we're using the platforms mainly because of equitable consistency.
Let me ask at this point, it has already appeared twice, the emphasis on how the district will provide continuity of instruction in a curriculum that is substantially of similar quality regardless of the method of delivery. So what steps were taken in order to reach that goal of getting a curriculum, assuring that students would have access to such a curriculum?
Well, I can speak for secondary, and I think it'll bleed into elementary as well. That decision was made 3.5 years ago when Edgenuity was chosen. That consistency of curriculum was chosen then. And yes, it's a different game when we're talking 6,000 kids versus 200 kids, but the decision to use the consistent curriculum, Edgenuity, 3 years ago has borne fruit here because we have the familiarity with that program.
So since we had say a test group of people, the people who were in the independent study program through Oak Ridge, what was the response to Edgenuity that led you to believe that that would be appropriate for this?
Well, I don't want to frame it going back 3 years, but I can tell you, since we've started this school year, I have yet to receive a single complaint from an Oak Ridge kid, student, or parent. And so that could imply that the population that's been using Oak Ridge in the past is really comfortable with the platform and the delivery. Obviously, we've been receiving a significant amount of feedback recently about the current population using Edgenuity, and so there are some challenges there. But based on the past and the feedback we'd been receiving, it had been working.
Okay, and that came also through vetting through teachers as well, and
Yes.
their experience with it.
And making adjustments, sorry to interrupt, but making adjustments. The Oak Ridge curriculum they're using now has been adjusted since the first year, with modules being added, adapted, removed, edited, assessments being adjusted. So those changes have taken place over the past 3 years, and those same kinds of changes will continue to be made.
Yes. Eileen?
John, something you just mentioned, I have a question. Is what was being used at Oak Ridge before, because they have had time to work with it and make some tweaks and adjustments and things, is that platform different than what we're using with our other secondary students?
So just to
And-
clarify, I'm sorry.
The second part of the question, if teachers at the secondary level are given flexibility to make modifications, add and subtract and flip curriculum usage in their classrooms, wouldn't that necessitate some kind of adjustment with the grading and stuff if it's not being delivered the same in every class?
So let me answer the first one, and the platform is the same. The courses and the modules, because there's such a wider scope of courses being offered versus what had been offered at Oak Ridge for a variety of reasons, both lower level and higher level or higher achievement, just different levels of coursework, that there is a significant number of courses that have been added to the whole course list. All of those courses have customization capability, every one of the courses. And that's actually what we're doing right in the middle of the customization. And that's a significant word, customization. Customization can happen prior to the course being even open to the students. One of the buttons to customize in Edgenuity is actually called On the Fly. You can customize on the fly if we feel like we need to customize along the way. So the customization is a critical piece of the flexibility of the program. And we're learning hourly of things we may need to consider to be customized.
Interject before you answer the second
Sure.
part? So one of the aspects of this is it does, talk about substantially similar quality, it does give access of the students to AP and to A to G courses that they need to qualify for college. And my understanding is you can only modify about 20% in order to keep that recognition official. So you can't just go in and take it apart.
Correct.
You just have a margin of correction or manipulation or innovation, but in order to keep the validity of the courses standing, you do need to stay there. And I think that's the continuity and substantially similar. They're not literally the same, but they're parallel issues.
And if I could reinforce with the board too, we do have a process for that customization. It's not just willy-nilly people deciding they want to add and drop across, the same course alike within a department. There's a process that the administration is involved in, and because some folks don't know all the implications of customization. So teachers and department chairs or department leads or course alikes meet with their admin team if they decide they're gonna customize.
Good to know.
Okay, I don't want to keep interrupting you, but thank you very much for the background on that.
All right, Section 5 addresses pupil learning loss. And as I mentioned, you'll see the theme running through this plan of 2019-20 and 2021 school years together, because really we are starting backwards in March and working on describing how the district will address pupil learning loss that results from COVID, our actions and strategies that we will use to address learning loss and accelerate learning progress, and a description of how these supports to address how learning loss is measured. I will address here too real quickly that pupil learning loss is of paramount concern, and it is really one of the pieces of this plan that jumps out to us the most. And with 6 months, virtually 6 months of kids not being in school, I think we all would agree that it is of paramount concern, and how are we going about it, and how can we adjust if it's not working, and how do we find that data that shows us if kids are learning or have lost some learning. And you'll see that again in another section in a moment. Section 6 talks about the mental health and social and emotional well-being. We are asked to address how our district will monitor and support mental health and social and emotional well-being of pupils and staff during the school year. To circle back to the beginning of how our community has had some life-changing things happen in it within the last couple of years. We were lucky to have some things in place, such as the at-risk counselors at the high school going into COVID. So we are fortunate in that regard, but we still are able to use the CARES Act money to increase our support in this regard. Section 7, pupil engagement and outreach. This is another piece that is pretty meaty and of concern, especially now in our early days of getting back into school. Our district's procedures for tiered re-engagement strategies for our pupils who are absent from distance learning, and how we will provide outreach to pupils and their parents or guardians, including in languages other than English. This actually came up today in the site council meeting I was attending to bring this plan for feedback. And it is paramount, especially in our teachers' minds. How are we going to make sure our kids are engaging? We want to see them and make sure they're okay. We want to see them and make sure they have access and they can learn. And if not, how can we help? We need to know so we can help. It spurred on some great conversation of how we can improve that. So that's just an example of we can write things in a plan, but when it takes on its own flavor at every school site and every school within our district under the big umbrella of how are we going to do this, it's just a great way to engage people with this kind of venue and taking this for feedback. We can engage people with their thoughts right now. For example, there was a second grade teacher that said, I'm worried about them. How do we know they're okay? So again, we want to make sure we're addressing that. Section 8 is school nutrition. As we all know, Vince Insero and his team at Nutrition Services does a bang-up job in this regard for our community, and we have included a description of how the district provides nutritionally adequate meals for all pupils when participating in both in-person instruction and distance learning. I will add through Vince's program and Nutrition Services program that all children under the age of 18 in our community will be fed.
I'd just like to add a personal observation. I was going to pick up my grandkids' lunches, and I saw a family that included a toddler all the way up to probably third grade kid, and they had 5 kids. And when I commented how great that was, they said, well, we have families here that have 7 kids, all 18 and under that's how they're getting their meals. So given the number of people in our community who have lost their jobs and for whom, they're fighting the issue of how they're going to do rent and all those other things, this has just been a phenomenal aspect. And on Friday, you get double. So I just really want to do a shout out to the teams at the schools, and they always have a smile.
I appreciate that comment because to add on to that, they always say, sure, no problem, we can do whatever you need. There's never a roadblock, there's never a but, it's what do you need? So, yeah. Section 9, and we're almost done. Section 9 is additional actions. This is a supplementary section that districts can put information in to address the additional actions that they are taking to implement the plan. We did include in this a description of our Workday Child Supervision Program. Currently, our Chico Unified staff is able to participate in a Workday Child Supervision Program on many of our sites in very small cohorts of children being supervised. It is not school, but they are supervised, and supervised by our classified staff who has been kind of reassigned because their job may or may not be their typical job may not be, what's the word? They may not have something, like a bus driver, for example. A bus driver may not be driving a bus every day in COVID, so that person has been working in a different capacity. We are increasing on Tuesday to include more of our students, including offerings to foster and homeless students, as well as some at-risk students that we would like to participate, and then also have our essential workers moving into that piece. We had some feedback from some people who in the community who are interested in that as well. We do have space capacity parameters that we are working with as we have certain spaces on campus, less than we would normally have because teachers are in the classrooms, but students are in small, socially distanced, and pods following all safety protocols. And the last part asks us about an explanation of how the needs of our foster youth, English learners, and low-income students were considered when making the plan and addressing the funding toward it. So that is an overview of what the plan is. In a moment, I'll show you just kind of an eyeball view of what it looks like. We can put the draft on the website as well for the next couple weeks until we have it come back for approval. But just again, for you to know, it is going to site councils, so we can have stakeholders from school sites give us input. It is particularly interesting, I think, the way this plan was created in July. The template was made on August 1st, and it is due by September 30th. And it's great to make a plan and to have an idea where we're going, but as reality comes to us, and the re-engagement strategies is a perfect example of that. How are we ensuring as we go through this that we are able to connect with our students and make sure we know where they're at, and if they're not engaging for whatever reason, we can work to find out why that is and how we can help. So the next steps, the plan will come back with all of the notes and additions, edits, deletions that we will have in the next couple of weeks. So we'll come back to you on September 16th.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Keene, and your assistants for all the information you provided. Okay, so I believe at this time, it would be good to go ahead and open up the public hearing. We can hear from the public, and then the board can talk about it if they wish, knowing that we will be bringing this back for actual approval at our next meeting. So if everybody's okay with that, we'll go ahead and we will first listen to our two speakers that signed up to speak. Initially, we have allocated 10 minutes towards this. When that 10 minutes has elapsed, we will ask the board if they wish to continue with more speakers, if there are more speakers who wish to speak, and we'll just handle it that way. It's 3 minutes per speaker, and so our first 3 speakers should probably take up most of our initial 10 minutes. So in any case, who is manning the,
Yep,
Mr.
I've got it.
Shepherd?
And thank you. We have 2 people who have submitted cards. The first person is Heidi Dossman. Heidi, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions. I just was, first off, I'm just kind of wondering where we are with the school waivers. If I know that the surveys have gone out, and I think we have till this Friday, but I'm just kind of, I've noticed, I've checked the board several times that they're all been received, but there hasn't been any updates to that. And then the next part is, of course, just, I understand the teachers are trying, everyone's trying very hard, but I'm just hoping that you guys are hearing that there are many of us who want our kids to get back into school. We know that the best way for them to learn, according to the CDC, a lot of pediatricians, Pediatric Society, that kids in school is the best way for them to learn. So I know from other friends that there are teachers who are out there who want to be in school, and some of them are actually kind of afraid to speak up because of unions and just other things their jobs are concerned with. You know, everyone's concerned about that right now. But I really am just speaking for the parents of the kids that many of us, want our kids in school. We just know that for them to learn this way is the best way. And I'm just hoping that these waivers are moving forward. So that's what I wanted to say.
Okay, Ms. Daly, did you want to mention anything having to do with the waivers at this point?
Sure. We sent the waivers out per the board direction, and they are in fact due this Friday. At that point, we will disaggregate the information by grade level and by school, and we will bring that information to the board at the September 16th meeting. And then at that point, the board will discuss and make decisions as to what the next steps would be. We have laid out steps, but the next step is at each way along the way is for the board to see the data and vote on that next step.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just clarify, I'm sorry, that Ms. Daly, you said you were sending the waiver out, you meant you sent the surveys out, right?
You are correct.
Okay.
Yes, we sent the elementary waiver surveys out. We sent those out to all elementary parents as well as classified staff and elementary teaching staff.
Okay, our next speaker is ready then?
Yes, our next speaker is Brandon Blisman. Brandon, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Brandon, your microphone is live.
All right. Hey, thank you. Hey, trusted board members. My name is Brandon Blisman, and I'm a proud parent of a 4th grader and a 7th grader in Chico Unified. I'd like to thank all of you for your commitment to the welfare and the education of Chico's youth. I would also like to commend you for all the thankless hours that it's been taken to navigate the Chico Unified ship through all these challenging and dynamic, ever-changing times. You know, over the last 3 years, Butte County has been no stranger to adversity. Butte County and the Chico Unified School Board have demonstrated an enormous amount of resiliency, patience, and really just love for our community. Through all of these challenges, you've been able to look to one thing to maintain the youth's social, emotional, and educational well-being, and that's school. You know, those kids look forward to going to school. Unprecedented events over the last few months have put our children back into the distance learning environment. You know, you guys have done a fantastic job engaging the parents with surveys along the way, soliciting feedback as a good way to make those kinds of important decisions regarding this upcoming school year. After reviewing some of the LCP, I couldn't help but notice that some of the higher ticket budget items were for Zoom and Edgenuity. Let me tell you about my son a little bit. Like most junior high schoolers, he's a kind, expressive, loving kid who looks forward to going to school. He's taken on the challenge of distance learning like a champion. But over the last week, I witnessed the crushing of a child's wonder and his desire to learn as his happiness turned to overwhelming frustration and tears on Edgenuity. Our kids are already suffering from lack of emotional connection and social interactions. Edgenuity really this last week have just fueled that fire. As parents, my wife and I, wanted if we wanted an education model similar to this, we might have just opted for Oak Ridge. You've sidelined the only good things left in some of these kids' life, which is their teachers. Edgenuity, in my experience over the last few weeks, has been nothing more than a sequence of videos that are very repetitive with minimal, if any, teacher interaction. A quick internet search for that platform yields some interesting results. One of them that I found of a recent school district who adopted it for a large population says that it does not meet expectations. Now, I understand that you had to maybe make a rush into this decision or maybe had some budget constraints. My hope is that there's been some misunderstanding when this I guess platform was selected for this large population of kids. I'm here this evening just to make a suggestion. I strongly suggest that you allow the teachers to conduct live teaching via Zoom, which I know you're paying for, track the progress through Google Classroom like they've done for many years now. You could even keep the same 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days in the middle school level there. Teachers could still
Mr. Blitzman, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, but your time is up. So
Okay, thank you.
appreciate your participation. Okay, so now we will take, if there is a person in the queue who was raising their hand, we will take a person there for
Okay.
our next 3 minutes.
Thank you. Michael Kerwin. Michael Kerwin, I am asking you to unmute. Michael, your microphone is available. Michael, all we're hearing is music, so I'm going to mute you. Would you like to take another speaker?
Yes, let's see who else has their hand raised.
Okay, we have Drew Collins is the next. Drew Collins. Okay, one more speaker.
Yep.
Okay, our next speaker, Darren Marshall. Darren Marshall, we're asking you to unmute.
Okay, we need to, I think something is happening here that is inappropriate.
Mhm.
So since we have allocated this 10 minutes and we cannot continue with anything further since something is happening with interference with our ability to listen to speakers. I'm not sure exactly what is going on, but Mr. Vincent, do you have any idea what that could possibly be?
With all due respect to Mr. Vincent, we have students who are logging in under other people's names and they're just playing games. They're playing music, they're taking time away from people who really have something to say. So unfortunately, they're impacting the community, but they're just playing games and they're logging in under other people's names. That's what's happening.
Okay, Dr. Kaiser?
Well, I would like to suggest that the people who had, and we've had some very, very good student comments, I mean, impressive. But I would really like to suggest that if there's a student or a parent out there who did have something they wanted to say and got unfortunately blocked by this kind of, scamming or whatever, that they please send us an email so that we can get their comments thoughtfully, and they will be attached to the minutes, correct, Erica? And so then other people get to read them as well. Thank you.
Okay, yes,
Kristen Griffin?
yes, Linda?
Yes, I have a couple of questions for Ms. Keene, if I might.
Okay, let me, well, I guess we can keep the public hearing open still until we hear that. Is that how that generally is acceptable?
Yes, we can continue discussion under the public hearing, or you can close the public hearing. My hope is that we can get this situation fixed so that we can hear from some of the public. I know we have people that want to talk, and it's frustrating that they're not able to do so.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'll keep the public hearing open. There's no harm in doing that. And I'll go to Linda, and then we'll go to you, Eileen.
Great. So, Ms. Keene, this plan, I'm going to try and formulate my question here cohesively. The learning continuity plan, is it a living document? And I ask this because it's really been a wild ride since the COVID-19 hit. You know, there's been so many different regulations. We have to move this way and that way and up and down. And so if we put this plan in place, what's to say something drastic isn't going to change, which really has to make us do a total upheaval on our plan? So I guess my question is, do we have to update this, and how often do we update this?
Good question. I asked the same question to our support, Jeanette Spencer, out at Butte County Office of Education, because I, like you, thought the same thing. And she said, and I totally agree with this, that yes, if things change, this is what we know as of right now, as of today, and to be due at the end of September. But certainly if things change, we can update and move forward. I don't know if the California Department of Education will continue on in some regard with a template down the way for that piece. I don't know certainly, but we would continue to have the most updated plan, I think, for our own knowledge and understanding and chronicling of what has happened. Yes.
Excellent. Then my second question is, you know, you had mentioned all schools need to do this, including charters. Do we have any oversight responsibility on the charters learning continuity plan that are authorized through our district?
Yes, much like the springtime, we had the COVID-19, no, that was last spring, the COVID-19 operations report that was due. The charters also had an obligation to complete that, and their in part of their obligation to put it forward to the county was also to pass it forward to us as the authorizer. The same remains for this one as well, yes, and I do happen to know they are working on it and going through the same processes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Ms. Robinson?
Yes, Madam President, thank you. I did want to just let the first speaker, whose name now I can't remember, know that I did recognize his points in an email that he had forwarded to the board. So just to let him know that I have read the complete email that he did send to us, and I appreciate his input and being there tonight. Sorry to the rest of the folks that are having a problem with this. Tina, I had the same question about updating as Ms. Hovey did, but I also had a concern. No, I had a question. Do you have a concern that we're going to have enough time for the teachers to do the evaluation of the access plan and stuff in order to put this together to submit? I mean, they're only going to have 2.5 weeks of experience, and so much of it right now is just getting kinks worked out. What kind of an obligation do we have to upgrade our plan, and who does the assessment? Is this going to the county, to the State Board of Education, to, who's reviewing these plans to say, Chico Unified looks great, or I'm sorry, Chico Unified, that doesn't quite meet the standard we were looking for.
Sure, I can address both of those. As far as your first comment about the engagement of students and how we are literally just right into school, the feedback I'm getting is, and going back to my roots as a teacher, I can understand this. Teachers want to see their students. They want to know that they are okay. They want to know they're there. And again, if they're not, those teachers by and large are ready to say, hey, we need some help here. We need to know where this student is. So by creating a flow chart, for lack of a better word, although each school has its own flavor and their own supports, we do have a lot of common supports. So it was great feedback to help create kind of a flow chart to make sure that nothing gets lost along the way in terms of how we reach out to our families. The second piece you asked about was the assessment and who reads it. This goes to the county, to Butte County Office of Education, and they read it, and it's not so much an approval as kind of a yes, I see that. They may ask us questions. They're really looking, from my understanding and trainings that we've been on, they're really looking to see how, more than anything, we are able to adjust to in-person and then distance. In-person, that's a part of that continuity that the plan requires. We hope we certainly do not go in and out of that. But they have offered trainings that I've been involved in, and really I feel like, as this is the first time this document has come out, and it does have a very early date, we're all in the same boat of putting in the best ideas and plans and then adjusting along the way as we have to.
Okay, Dr. Kaiser?
So I think the essential concept here and concern is fluid. If we look at the universities around the country who have opened to in-person education, it's been largely an absolute disaster. Even Chico State, who had every single possible health caution and had dramatically reduced their students and only had certain lab classes that were in person with very highly technical equipment, they lasted 1 week. University of Alabama, 1,000 cases in, I think, less than a week. So nobody has an answer to this yet. I think this is just the effort to sort of appreciate how complex this might be, that we don't forget to touch a part of education that we see as critical. It doesn't mean that anybody's answer is going to hold up for the whole semester or school year. I think those are all just reality checks.
Okay, yes, Tom?
Sorry. I'm looking at the section 7 on the LCP, which is again the pupil engagement and outreach portion. And it sounds like the major concern we're hearing from those families that are not thrilled with Edgenuity is that missing relationship piece. So I was hoping twofold, that one, you could talk to us specifically about what we are doing to reach out to families who feel isolated and disengaged. Like, does that plan look like? What steps we're taking? And secondly, I'm not sure if this would have been directed at you or Ms. Staley, what can we do going forward to make sure that we don't lose more student engagement, or that we continue to build on those relationships, which are in many ways the most valuable part of our district, that relationship between teacher and student?
So sure, for the families that we get that are not engaging, that means that teachers are seeing that students are not, they're not attending. They, again, I go back and I feel like we do this so much, but they're so pivotal. The targeted case managers that we have on site are of tremendous assistance. Many times they know the families on the site very well. They are aware of things that might be happening within the family. Many of them have done home visits or have made phone calls. They are reaching out as well. The wellness teams on the sites as well, as school has started, are involved. And I think we will just continue to see that grow within each school. The second piece of that relationship, we all agree that relationships do matter, and it is very hard in this online learning to do that. Our counselors are available as well to reach out, and they are doing a tremendous job, the best that they can do, to get kids engaged in those time slots to meet with them.
Mr. Orlando, if I may, one of the other things that Mr. Shepardon's been working with his principals and department heads, as he talked earlier, is about pulling out lessons of ingenuity and adding in more Zoom lessons with our teachers. So they'll be going back and forth of doing that and trying to see how they can get their children more, or the students more engaged in their lessons, so we can add some of their own lessons in there, because we're clearly hearing it from our students that they're missing their teachers. And we want to be able to do that. We have to be very careful on how many lessons we do that, because we have to keep them A to G compliant, or we're allowing teachers in the future to come to us if they have a full course designed that we can look at to see if we want to improve it to replace. So we do hear their concerns, and we will continue to work with that so we can get more teacher engagement with our students.
Can I add just one more thing, just moving forward? We've been meeting regularly to decide to identify a professional development plan that's ongoing to address our targeted student populations. And while we're addressing those targeted student populations, we also think we'll be addressing all our students. So we are in the middle of planning a district-wide staff development day on September 15th that will, what we think will provide some insight, including inviting panel members who represent those targeted student populations, panel members who represent our English learners, our students with disabilities, our African American students, our foster and homeless. So they'll be a part of panels to help us discover additional mechanisms to engage those students, because these folks have lived that experience. So rather than just assuming that we can keep doing what we're doing, we're going to try to add to our toolkit.
Okay, I want to bring something up that relates to what is going on in this very meeting. And that is, this is a Zoom meeting, and there's manipulation that has occurred by students coming in and doing things to interfere with the process. And my understanding is that with Zoom meetings that have occurred where teachers have been teaching, the same sort of thing has happened. So a lot of parents have been saying, well, just put the teachers back up there and have Zoom meetings and have them teach in a regular classroom type of situation. But if we're seeing this type of behavior where students who are out there come in and mess around with the system and prevent the teacher from teaching and prevent information from being disseminated to other students, is there a great risk of that happening? So I would like to bring that to people's attention, that if people are looking to utilizing Zoom and having teachers in front of their classrooms like they would be in their regular classroom setting where they're instructing and they're interacting, it would be wonderful if they could do that. But one of the things we're seeing is that, unfortunately, there are people out there that are subverting that process. Just like you had kids in the back of your classroom that were messing around and trying to, disturb the class, you got the same thing going on in Zoom. So one of the questions I have is the Google Meet, is that a safer type of process, or is it the same threat that goes on with that? And the additional thing that I think of too is, if you do have all these type of things going on, is the system going to be overloaded, or have we taken care of that? I know we've done things to boost our systems with the Zoom, but can that be overloaded if there's a lot more happening on the system? So if someone could address that.
Yeah, John Vincent, I think he can address the Google piece, and I can talk about the overloading the system from a different perspective.
Okay.
So in regards to your first question about Zoom, there are steps that we can take to help secure Zoom so these things don't happen. there still are ways that kids can find around things, but we can take steps to really mitigate these. So we can talk about it in private. I really don't want to say what those are here in a public forum. As far as Google Meet goes, one nice thing about Google Meet is it's tied to Google Classroom. So all the kids are already logged in with their email addresses, and with Google Classroom, you see who is all in Google Meet. You can see who's there. So it really helps to mitigate this.
So not so easy to crash it.
So in Google Meet, it's not easy to crash it because you have to log in with the Chico Unified email address or account, our kids do, and you can see exactly who it is. Whereas like with this Zoom that we're seeing here, this just has an anonymous link that people can click on and put in whatever name they want, and that's what we're seeing here. So it's difficult in this situation to manage this, but in Google Meet, it is easier.
Well, I mean, I guess it's, we have very proficient students who are so good with computers that they can do this sort of thing. I guess that's a positive to this, but I sure wish they would use their talents in other ways.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, we definitely do not want to have the crashing. We don't want to have the bombing. We've had some pretty horrible things that have happened, and I'm not sure if all the families out there, the parents out there are aware that those type of things have happened, and that has been something we've had to consider as well.
So one
Yeah.
thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm just going to add a family example. So my niece is an AP art teacher down in San Marcos and going crazy teaching because she has a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, and the 3-year-old boy. And he was driving her crazy. And the last thing he did yesterday was, while she's sitting in her lap, he signed out every kid in her class and said, "Have a good day." So, it's hard to stay ahead of them.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. John, did you have more to add?
Yeah, I just have one more thing. So this week, we migrated over to the education licenses for Zoom for all of our staff. So we can then look at those different things that we can do to help make those meetings more secure and push out those settings now to our staff to help them to know
Okay.
what settings they need to set to make their meetings more secure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for all the hard work you've done trying to secure this.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, any further questions from, I'm sorry?
Well, John Shepherd had a comment, and then I wanted to
Yes,
make-
John.
Oh, just really quickly, so we have some folks in the district that are directly affiliated with Chico State's platforms, and Blackboard is the platform that Chico State uses, affects over 150,000 CSU learners, and it went down. And it's been in effect for, I think, 12 years. So we're going to face some of these issues. I'm not for a second, implying that that's a good thing, but these things are going to happen, and we'll just need to adapt to them.
Okay, yes.
Well, I just wanted to say, it's very frustrating because I received a lot of communication regarding Edgenuity. I know the board did as well, and we certainly wanted to be able to hear from people, and I know we had people that wanted to speak. But this is an example of what our teachers are facing and the challenges that we're facing. So I've been on some meetings with superintendents and other educational leaders up and down the state and even in our own county, and they were very excited to hear from me, how is Edgenuity going? How is using a platform going? Because they were experiencing some very embarrassing and frightening incidents with Zoom and, even some in Google Classroom that had taken place. And I had to say, you know what, we don't have the answer either, because obviously we are disappointing a lot of students and families with the Edgenuity rollout. That has not been certainly what anybody had hoped. And we are now taking steps to rectify that. We understand, we heard last year from our parents loud and clear, 4,000 surveys came back, and we need a more continuity to our program. So when we looked, we thought, okay, this will provide that continuity. This will allow a platform that is the same for everyone moving forward so that we can get in that rhythm, recognizing all along we would then need to be pulling teachers back in to provide instruction and connection. But we need to do that faster because kids have been out of school now for 6 months, and they are out of the routine, but they really, now more than ever, need that connection with their teachers. They need that connection with their peers. We all wish we could be back in person because, so we wouldn't be having these kind of discussions and frustrations, maybe other frustrations, but not these. So there really isn't the perfect answer out there. There are issues with Zoom. There are issues with Google Classroom. Both Google Meet and Zoom crashed and were down today. We were actually meeting with a student regarding the Edgenuity platform. She was very articulate, had wonderful suggestions, but she kept freezing. We kept losing her. So those are the frustrations that other districts are facing. We are facing the frustrations with Edgenuity. So I think our approach needs to be, how do we integrate as much interaction as possible, provide that social emotional support for our kids so our families see that there are staff members there for their kids, that we're not just throwing them, into a setting here, click on this and go. That has not worked. We've heard that loud and clear, and we will make adjustments to that. And that, we do appreciate the parents and the students that have reached out to us and said, hey, here's the gaps. This isn't working for me. But just know that straight Zoom isn't working for people either. So it's finding that happy medium. We're not going to get it right tomorrow, but we will keep working towards that. We need to keep hearing from you. Give us those suggestions. When we get it's just overwhelming, that doesn't help. But when you can be specific, and we certainly had that from the young lady we spoke with today, we've had it from several of the parents, then we can address those issues. So be patient with us, be kind and patient with your children as well, and we will continue to slug through this. And I am so apologetic that we cannot hear from people tonight because I know there were many of you that wanted to speak.
Well, there was one more thing that I wanted to mention because we weren't able to hear more speakers that kept coming up with Edgenuity in that conversation. And something that I wanted to make sure all the parents understood is that we have arranged teacher time in the afternoons for teachers to address some of the concerns. If students are having a difficult time, and parents, if they know their students are having a difficult time, so whether it's the students or the parents, please contact the teacher directly and explain what you are experiencing so that they can help you individually. We as a board can hear these things, but they are right there on the front line and they are willing to help. So please do that as well.
And I think one of the things that we can do here, we have received a lot of email communication regarding the concerns. What we can do is post those so that people can see that they're there, that we are hearing them, that we are getting that input. Again, it's just frustrating not to be able to have the input at this board meeting, but we can provide those.
Yes, thank you. Okay, with that being said, unless there's anything further, I'm going to close the public hearing. And was there anything anyone else wanted to say at this point?
I just don't think my niece will rent out her little boy, but, we all have kids that are adaptable to internet, and we have kids who need a different framework, and we're just doing our very best.
And we all understand that that is what we want. Yep. And we're trying to get there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. And I believe since there is no action to be taken, we are just going to move forward to our next item, which is a human resources item that has to do with providing information about policy training and a complaints overview. And that would be Mr. Hanlon and I believe Mr. Marchant, maybe together?
Mr. Colt, I'm going to have him make his way up
Oh,
here
Mr.
while I go get
okay.
the clicker. So give me a minute.
Oh, I see. You're switching chairs here. Okay, so we have Mr. Cole, who is the Executive Director of Human Resources, and we have Mr. Jim Hanlon, who is the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources.
Okay. So in light of recent events, the board has made a request to review district policies on inappropriate and unprofessional behavior, harassment, mandated reporting, staff training, and the complaint procedures, regardless if it's a student, a parent, or an employee. So we're going to cover those. We're not going to sit here and read a bunch of district policy for you, but we're going to summarize it and go through it. And if there's any questions, then we're here to answer those and go through them, but hopefully we'll answer many of your questions for you. So with that, David is going to start here.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Sexual harassment policy 41-1911 really deals with our protected groups of different employees based on the identities that are listed here, gender and gender identity expression. But it's not just limited to those. It's those and includes other groups as well. When we look at the training requirements for all employees, we actually have 2 hours of training that are required for all supervisors. We require 1 hour of training for all classified or all employees, district across the board. And we also supplement that training where we've brought in Kingsley Bogart to provide further training regarding sexual harassment, as well as gender identity training with Lindsay Moore. So Kim Bogart and Lindsay have both come out and helped present. When we look at the public policy dissemination, we have postings across the district for harassment, our policies posted. We also, during our orientations, provide the training for sexual harassment, and then that annual training that I just spoke of, where we do it every 2 years, or every year, for 2 hours for our supervisors and 1 hour for non-supervisors. And then finally, within that policy, there are components of it that within the board policy, it talks about if you violate that, there's a component that if someone makes a complaint, we make sure that there is no retaliation regarding that complaint, but further, if you violate it, you can be disciplined up to including discharge. So it's a very strong policy. We use it quite a bit to support our employees, but we make sure everyone is trained on that policy.
Okay, so this one is employee-to-employee harassment. The next one is harassment targeting a child by anyone. So it could be another child, it could be an employee of ours, it could be a contractor, but anyone that targets a child. So all of those other things apply, but it also specifically prohibits retaliatory behavior and a requirement to immediately report, which is our mandated reporting requirement. So it's embedded in this board policy. And then also a requirement to ensure that all students receive age-appropriate information on sexual harassment, and that's embedded in our health curriculums along the way, so students get knowledge and information in those areas as appropriate at a particular grade level. Okay.
So 41-1921, the professional standards, goes into a lot more detail. It really focuses on exercising good judgment when interacting with students, staff, or members of the public. It will go into, if you look, it's got a lot of great descriptions within it describing what inappropriate conduct is. Beyond those that are listed, it also talks about when you single out a student for any personal attention or friendship. It goes into discussions about being alone with a student outside of the sight of others. It talks about inappropriate contact as well. Within this, there's also a component of requiring people to report any discrimination, harassment, intimidation, or bullying. So it goes into creating the standards of what we expect our employees. It still holds if someone does make a complaint, there is the retaliation protection component to it. And this board policy as well carries discipline with it. So if someone does violate it, they can be held accountable.
Okay, so the next one, 4119.24, even goes beyond that. And as you can see, has many of the same things, but also non-educational contact with the student. And it used to be just phone, letter, that kind of thing. But in the social media age, electronic age, we recently have added email, text, and then also participating inappropriately in social networks. So we do permit social networks to be made, for example, like a banned Facebook, as long as it's public and parents are aware of it and have access to it. And it's a good way to communicate to the whole band, be at the homecoming game half an hour beforehand at such and such a place, plan to meet and warm up and those types of things. So there's some good things with social networks, but we require staff to participate them in a very public way. They may not go on to a student social page and then befriend them and those types of things. That would be considered inappropriate. We also require for the use of district equipment when they're communicating with students, because that is our equipment, and if there is any suspected inappropriate behavior, we have the right to inspect that equipment and see what's going on. So if a employee is contacting a student through their own private means, that's a big red flag for us.
And it's
So,
really
Jim-
for their safety.
Yes, it's
Well,
for
so
both
if there's
ways.
an allegation, we
They
can
should
show.
use a
Yes.
district phone?
They could, we don't have many of those. They're not really handed out. They're kind of administration, so there might be in an emergency type of a thing, but at least then there's a record of it, and we
Well,
have
I mean,
access
when
to
you
that.
say half hour before the football game, meet here, that could be a last minute change. How would they communicate that if it's not on the, I don't.
It could be, but again, this is a protection for the students and the employees, so it might not work out for that particular game. So I know that, and that was an example, but I know that teachers will sometimes use those very public social pages and instruct students, be sure you check that, an hour before the event or something like that.
So the next policy is really a focus on the importance of creating and maintaining a positive school and climate. And here, it lists within it some of the attributes that go into supporting that, but really the focus of this is on enhancing an orderly and caring, non-discriminatory teaching environment. And so it's one of the shortest policies we have, but probably one of the most important ones we have.
So the next one here are regarding complaint procedures. So with 1312.1, it's a direct implication or a direction that specific formal complaints go through the uniform complaint procedure. There's a lot of different items in the uniform complaint procedure that parents can make a complaint about, or employees can make a complaint about, or even students. But the one that is particular to harassment, intimidation, and bullying is the one we're referring to here. We do have a uniform complaint procedure officer. That's Tina, among all the other things she does. But typically it doesn't get to that level. It can be a supervisor, but sometimes that's not to the satisfaction of the person that has made the complaint. And so there's always a way to appeal it. And eventually you can see down there at the very bottom, the final appeal could come to the Board of Education if the person was not satisfied with the outcome. Anonymous complaints are permitted. However, we have to inform the individual that it may be difficult to thoroughly investigate the situation without giving their confidential information up. Of course, we don't do that unless without their permission, but we make sure that they're clear that that may impede the investigation. It may not be as thorough as we would like it to be if we were able to identify the person. But we do accept those and we do follow up on those. And then 4144 is a complaint for people that do not work for Chico Unified, but have complaints about the interview process, the selection process, that type of thing, if they feel that they have been discriminated against. Okay, the next one is just some civil and legal rights. It's kind of all of the other things, so protection for religious and political activities as long as they're not done on the job. They cannot be brought into the classroom in any way, but if it's in their private life, they cannot, an employee cannot be discriminated against. It clearly states that district property that's under the employee's control, particularly a computer in the classroom, is district property, and we have a right to search that if we have suspicions. Yes, Kathy?
So I'm thinking of two distinct examples. So if your religion requires you to have a certain physical presentation, usually it's clothing, sometimes it's how the hair is presented. We can't prevent them from coming to school that way, correct?
Right. I think it particularly refers to trying to communicate that to kids or influence them, or using your position of authority to influence or somehow impress on them your religion or your political activities.
And so in the second aspect of that, outside of the religious one, we had the example of a teacher who got harassed and threatened because she wore a Black Lives Matter t-shirt in her class. Would we have a reaction to that? Because
Well, there are some that could argue that's political. I would probably leave that to the board to make a final determination, because that's going to be, I don't know, you can get into particular, that's a very good question. I don't really have an answer
the
for it.
teacher got threatened and her
Yeah.
home
Well,
was
that would be-
addressed and.
Yeah, the threats and intimidation, those are very clear, that those would be investigated, absolutely. We do have some exceptions on political, the political piece of it. So you might have a unit in government during an election, but they have to present both sides, so equally, so that students are making up their mind given the information that they have. But it would be a pertinent lesson for the particular curriculum. But if somebody brought in a yard sign and hung it in their classroom for one particular candidate or issue or proposition, then that would not be okay. And then, of course, whistleblower protections, and then limited protections against liability. So obviously, if someone is in the commission of a crime and not following board policy and the laws of the land, then the district is not liable for their actions. They're on their own. But if they are doing things that are in accordance with board policy and the law, and they are sued, then the district would take liability in those situations to protect them.
So in the area of staff development, this is probably one of the areas that we've grown the most in. I'll give you this too, Jim. This is an area in one of the last handout, you'll see that we have about 5,500 hours of training that occurred last year. If you go back a couple of years ago, it was probably in the 1,200s or less. This is an area that we've focused quite a bit on. In terms of internal training, we provide Office, Word, Excel, things of that nature for employees interested in moving up in the clerical areas. We'll send our employees in the paraeducator. About 43% of all our employees are paraeducators. We'll send them down to a paraeducator conference. We provide escape training for our staff down in Sacramento. We've brought speakers in for paraeducator training at the beginning of classes or at the beginning of the school year. We also bring our nurses in for additional training. One of the things that you'll see on the handout here, we start talking about the new hire orientations. There's kind of a breakdown of what that list and what happens. So every single employee that gets hired in the classified side is required to go through a 4-hour orientation. And part of that is on that green sheet that Jim has handed out is a breakdown of some of the classes and some of the things they have to watch, videos they have to see, trainings they have to go through. And at the end of that, there's a time when they come back in after they've seen those, and we'll provide another hour of training and address any questions or concerns they have about anything they've read. It's our chance to do the I-9s and things of that nature. But it's a very extensive orientation and training that occurs. So every single employee, when they first get hired, goes through that training, and then we do the annualized mandated trainings, followed up with some additional trainings to help support our classified employees that go forward.
All right. So that's a brief overview of the board policies and the training, quite extensive training that we do with all employees. So any questions at this point?
Questions?
I have a comment, if I
Yes,
might.
Linda?
I would just like to remind the public that all of our board policies are online, including the uniform complaint procedure. So they don't have to feel uncomfortable about filing a complaint. They can get the forms online. Am I
Yes,
correct
thank
with
you.
that, Jim?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes,
Hanlon?
thank you very much. Yes, that's a good point.
Good.
Okay,
Thank
yes,
you.
Tom?
And along the same lines, I would just love it if someone from administration would reiterate exactly what the process should be. What's that first step if a student or a parent feels uncomfortable or unsafe with any of our staff?
Well, initially, they would report that to the supervisor, unless, of course, that supervisor was the one that was involved in the harassment or complaint, then they would bypass that person, go up. So initially, the complaint should go to their first supervisor, and then, depending on what the extent of the issue is of the problem, whether that needs to be communicated directly to line, it depends on what level of, not all harassment's the same, and not all, comments are the same, so we'd initially deal with those at the first step with the supervisor.
And if it was a student, often they go to the person they're most comfortable with, which might be a teacher, a close teacher that they're comfortable with, a counselor perhaps. They don't often go to administration with those kinds of things because that's not who they normally interact with on a day-to-day basis. So we would encourage students to go to any adult, and then those adults are required then to report it on to their supervisor.
But very simply, Tom, if a parent or a student has a concern, ideally, they would first share that with the teacher and see if there's a misunderstanding. But that doesn't happen sometimes because that's very uncomfortable and difficult to do. And the order would be then go to their supervisor. For a parent with a concern over a teacher would be to the assistant principal or principal. If there is still concern at that point, they do not feel that that has been resolved, then it would go on up. If it's an elementary issue, it would go to Ted. If it's a secondary issue, it would go to John, to Jay, myself, the board, would be the sequence that would go. And the further it goes along, the easy answers have been resolved, right? So if there is really an issue and somebody is feeling uncomfortable and they are adamant about it, by all means, follow that complaint procedure.
We do the mandated training each year that David was talking about earlier, and so there is clear direction, instruction for staff, at least, to what they need to do in order to go through those steps. Most of the, as Kelly said, most of the incidences that happen get handled at the site level, at a much lower level. I don't know how many formal complaints you had last year, Tina, but it's like a pyramid. The tough ones end up in her lap, so if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think last year there were approximately 5.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's fairly rare that it gets to that very formal process where you have an exceptionally tough case.
Yeah, I might add too, with the mandated reported training, that also gives skills to the employees, so they're actually knowing what to look for. So a lot of times, that whole process is not just about when it happens, what do you do, but be aware of these kinds of circumstances. If you see these things, if you're aware of these things, those are indications, and that would be something that would go up the line as well.
Okay, Eileen, did you have a question?
Yes, well, just a clarification. In the orientations and trainings that we do train every employee, whether it's the campus supervisor or a cook, they all get the same training because, like you said, lots of times the trusted person on campus is not, an obvious person, but, there are kids that are aides with other staff members that do become, trust the person enough to be able to disclose something that is problematic for them. So I appreciate that the training goes to everyone. And I also was struck again, I hadn't read those policies completely for a while. But they really are extremely enlightening in that they spell out and describe exactly what's inappropriate, what we're looking for, what to look for. I was pleased that we have them in there that cover basically just about anything you could imagine to protect everyone, to protect our staff and our students. So I appreciate the work you guys do to.
Well, and they're updated frequently. The social media one was something that all of you adopted in recent years, fairly recent, because it had become an issue, at some place in the state, and you can see where the pitfalls are there. So they are looked at every year and updated as needed.
So maybe one last thing regarding Eileen's comment. I'm sorry.
Well, it's a comment, though. In my professional expertise area, I would have parents come up to me and they'll start the disclosure about their kid by saying, my kid doesn't want anyone to know. And that's one of the most difficult things, because I'm having to provide legal advice to them. But when your kid is going to refuse to testify, I think that one of the most important things, if we could encourage all of our staff, that there is no recourse, retribution effect. But I think many times these, especially if it's a student, they perceive that other students will exact some kind of sanction. So it's just a very difficult process.
That's probably our biggest barrier, is the fear of retaliation. I mean, we hear that at every level, whether it's a parent or a student or a staff member. And so that trust piece and then that training piece is critical so that people feel that they can safely come forward.
David, did you have more to say?
Yeah, I think just one last comment regarding the training and ensuring that every employee gets the same training. We're able to track that within our process, and so we'll actually follow up with people that have not had that training, and then we annualize that training every year at the same time of the year so that we know that anyone that's hired through the new year goes through the orientation training that will capture that, and all those people that have gone through it already are going to get it again next year at the same time, and so we're confident we're reaching out there.
First of all, I am very confident in the policies and the people who are writing them, and even in 99.99999% of our staff. Given that this is not a time to pat ourselves on the back, something slipped up, given to the situation that led us to talk about this. And I really want to challenge everybody in this room to find a way to improve this process. The trust that children will be safe when they are with us is the number one thing that makes the school work. We were just talking about that in a different context. This can't happen again. We have to do better. So please, until we meet again, I would love to hear some ways we can do that.
And we'd love to hear suggestions from you and the board as well.
I am thinking on it as hard as I can.
Well, I have to say one thing about that, and that is that no matter how hard you try, people will be doing things, and if they are, savvy enough, if they're deceptive enough, if they're careful enough in what they do, they will get away with things. And I know, Tom, you've been on the board for, maybe close to 2 years now, but we've seen a lot of different things come before us. And, it was not based on any person not seeing something, not reporting something. It was just that when people are engaged in something like that, they're very deceptive, very discreet in some ways, and it's very hard to discern. So I would just like to say that I don't personally blame anybody for that happening or say I think that we have what's in place, and people are encouraged to come forward. We have it embedded in our rules that if you see something, if you know something, if you hear something, if you suspect something, you are required to come forward. So that's about as much as we can do to get to the root of things at times. And we would hope that people wouldn't do this to kids, but having a background in child protective services, I know a lot of really bad things happen to kids, and this is one of them. So anyhow, I don't want to belabor this, but yes, we will be doing our very best to make sure that this sort of thing does not happen. Yes.
Thank you, Liz. Just to give some historical perspective on where we've been and where we are now. I go back quite a ways with this school district, and starting in 1973, I was a union representative for employees. And incidents of sexual harassment in the first 10 years that I was involved with this district were not handled well. It just was a different time in our world and society, and people were afraid to come forward, and they were afraid to back up their fellow employees, that, witnesses were afraid to come forward. What we have now in the way of training and support, and the role of Tina in the process that goes all the way through our complaint procedure, is way ahead of what we dealt with in the 70s. And I so appreciate that people have just said, this is not acceptable. And we will not tolerate abuse of our kids, number one, but our fellow employees, as well as, anyone else. This just is not okay. And I appreciate the work that we've done as a district over the years to improve our policies and our attitude. Quite frankly, our attitude has changed.
I agree. And one of the other things that I think is very important is that the whistleblower protections are critical to making sure that people know they're going to be protected. If they speak out, they're going to be protected, and there will not be retaliation. So anyhow, with that, unless there's anything further, I believe this concludes our meeting. And we will adjourn, and we will go into our closed session. So thank you all for being here and participating. And once again, we are very sorry about the problem that happened with Zoom.